Well, holy shit. I actually managed to do it. After procrastinating for ages, I finally managed to produce an audiobook version of the Lunatic Fringe book. It's currently available on all Amazon sites, audible.com, and shortly on iTunes. And if you're the page-turning type, it's also, of course, still available in Kindle form, paperback, and hardback on Amazon. 10 hours and 10 years worth of Blue Skies Magazine's articles, all available to you right fucking now, including a few author's notes and even an apology or two. Enjoy.
In a world.
Mate, hold up. We said we're done with the serious intros.
Who said?
Well, we did.
I don't remember that.
Well, I said it, and you're me, so, you know.
Well, I don't care. In a world.
Hey, I told you. We're keeping it light.
You do it on your own then.
Well, technically, I already am. So, anyway. Fuck yeah. Pure wild flight. Get it down ya. How good? Visit nzaerosports.com.
I get to do the next one.
Well, obviously, you moron. We both do.
Of course, I absolutely love the NZ Aerosports business model. I mean, come on. One glance at an Icarus fuck yeah sticker and you know it lines up perfectly with the fucking pilot mentality. But outside their wonderful use of colorful language and a great company vibe, there's a long list of reasons to say NZ Aerosports fuck yeah. NZ Aerosports blows me away right out of the gate as a canopy manufacturer with a bold offer. They give you 10 jumps on your brand new nylon to decide if you want to keep it, swap it out, or even return it for a refund. I mean, seriously, how incredible is that? That's like getting halfway through a prom and deciding you prefer the slightly racier date that goes down faster. Seriously, they do that. If you're not madly in love with your new canopy after 10 jumps, they'll let you swap it out for another size or model, or even get your money back. And the range of canopies they've got? Man, they've got a style canopy to fit every jumper and every situation with models you know and trust, like the Sapphire 3, the perfect choice for the beginner or intermediate canopy pilot. The Crossfire 3, when you're ready to kick it up that elliptical notch. The JFX 2, if you're looking to up your new swoop game. The Leia as the workhorse and dirtwater dirt beast. Or the Petra. The Petra cranks out crazy power and is nothing short of a record breaker. But hey, it's not always about speed either. Take the Kraken. Built as a low pack volume canopy specifically with wingsuiting in mind, she gives you all the performance you're looking for with the reliability you need that'll have you itching for that next formation, rodeo, or puffy cloud. So the equipment is top of the line kick-ass stuff as you already know, but how about the team? Well, the customer service gang is there to sort you out whenever you need them. Maddie and Beto are always there to help with Jen holding the reins. They're available for you at sales@nzaerosports.com, and they've got a kick-ass live chat tool on the website if you're wanting to hit someone up right away. These are the crew you're going to want to talk to get those custom orders in. With the stock nylon, once you know what you want, they'll have that shit on a FedEx truck as soon as the credit card machine says approved and get you in the air in no time. For your custom orders, you'll be able to get a time frame for building and shipping when you design it, so get to it. And demos. They've got demos in the US available from their partner Rock Sky Market. The whole US demo fleet is there with Sapphire 3, Crossfire 3, Kraken, JFX2, and Leia canopies in a range of sizes. They also offer student and tandem demos in the US. Bottom line, every step of the way, NZ Aerosports is there to get you what you need, and I personally couldn't be happier to be teamed up with them here on Lunatic Fringe. And now, time to get started with Lunatic Fringe Into the Void, brought to you proudly by NZ Aerosports. Fuck yeah!
Coming straight from the cockpit, it's another episode of Lunatic Fringe with the fucking pilot.
Ready, set, go! Back in the can for another edition of Lunatic Fringe Into the Void, the internet bringing me yet another rock star. Please tell me, who the fuck are you and what do you do?
Hey, it's good to be here. My name is Ben Nelson. I am a full-time skydiver and rigger and a full-time bum. That's basically what I'm doing.
A full-time bum man skydiver? Nah, I'll tell you what, skydivers and riggers in particular work too fucking hard to actually hold the title bum as well.
Well, and to be fair, riggers can make a little bit more money than the average skydiver. So we tend to be a little bit more snotty and snooty when it comes to, we won't sleep in our car. We'll sleep in a hotel.
Fair enough. I was a pilot long enough on the road that I refused to do the back room sleeping bag bullshit. You're going to get me a hotel room if I'm flying your loads. It always seemed fair.
Yeah, I mean, you got to treat the pilot well, right?
Well, and the rigger.
Yeah, especially those two, especially if they're a pilot and a rigger.
I mean, you're only supposed to abuse the jump staff. The rest of them, they're important, right? So. Yeah. As I usually do with the podcast, I jump people back to how they got into not necessarily just our sport, but into anything that normal society deems extreme. So where did it all start for you?
Man, so it started for me at a relatively young age. I'm from Anchorage, Alaska. That's where I'm from. All my family still lives in Alaska. When you live in Alaska, living itself can be extreme half the time. We used to joke that it's extreme enough in the wintertime that it can be pretty hectic. But when you turn 5 in Alaska, you either put on a pair of hockey skates or you put on a pair of skis. This was back before snowboard. And so I decided to put on skis. And so I grew up doing skiing, which I guess some people could consider to be extreme.
Oh, yeah.
And then I grew up in a family that liked to do stuff outside. My dad was a climber. So I actually was a big wall and alpine climber for many, many years back in the 90s. And so that's kind of how I got into being outside and doing the active stuff that got me to where I am today, for sure.
Nice. So you grew up skiing. What is the place out there? Alyeska?
Alyeska, there's a couple different places, obviously, and backcountry skiing in Alaska and heli skiing is really big as well. There's a lot of land to ski.
Sure.
But yeah, Alyeska is the one that's closest to Anchorage. It's just a hop, skip, and a jump, 35-minute drive from downtown.
Nice.
And so it was easy to get done with school and hop in the car and drive down and do some night skiing, and before going back home to get up and do it all over again the next day.
Sure. Well, I mean, it's funny that you were kind of sideways about whether or not skiing could be considered extreme, because fuck me, man, people drop like flies skiing. It can be pretty extreme. It's skiing and snowmobiling.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess when I say extreme, I guess what I kind of mean too is mainstream.
Sure.
Because skiing has been mainstream for quite a while now. I mean, coming out of the 80s and rolling into the 90s, you can walk back in the 90s, you could walk into a bookstore and find 3 or 4 different skiing magazines. I would say that would make it more mainstream. And so some people would say, oh, it's not super extreme, it's more mainstream. But yeah, man, some of the extreme skiing that you see back home in Alaska, they used to do some of the extreme skiing championships down there in Valdez, which can be very dangerous. And yeah, man, a lot of people have gotten themselves hurt or killed for sure. But when it's something like you grow up with, it might be extreme for someone in Florida, but not very extreme for other people that grow up in the areas where you can ski.
Sure. I mean, I grew up in Northern California and skied Lake Tahoe my whole childhood and didn't consider skiing itself extreme, again, for the same reason you just said. You grew up with it, until the first and only time I've ever been on a snowboard, which is also the only time I've ever knocked myself unconscious.
And it had to be taken down the slope.
Yeah, well, I don't remember any of that. I only remember the second stupidest question a doctor has ever asked me, which was, how long have you been unconscious?
Oh, my gosh. And you're like, I don't know. I was unconscious.
Exactly. So now tell me a little bit about the big wall climbing, because I have a lot of friends that have done a massive amount of big wall climbing, and it's always intrigued and scared the shit out of me.
Really? I guess it just depends on how, like I said, if you grow up doing it. My dad was a climber. He was one of the first people to do a winter traverse of Denali back in the 60s.
Oh, wow.
They didn't summit, but they traversed it. And my family being originally from Minnesota, he came back from that trip and convinced my mom to move to Alaska. And that's how we actually ended up in Alaska. My dad was a climber. And so, I had all the old gear. You're playing around with dad's gear in the garage. He doesn't really climb much, didn't really climb much anymore, but next thing you know, you're out just climbing anywhere. In Alaska, you can practically throw a stone and find a cliff to climb, And then, by about the mid-90s, you started seeing some more rock gyms starting to pop up. Anchorage got its first rock gym, and then it got its second rock gym. And so, again, it was easy to get your friends after school, go over to the rock gym and start climbing. And then in the summer times, what are you going to do? You're going to be outside camping and hiking and doing all that other stuff.
Sure.
And then that just eventually morphed into doing bigger and bigger trips. And next thing you know, you're doing routes on El Cap and you're doing climbs in Yosemite, some stuff in northern Pakistan and a few other places like that. But yeah, when you grow up doing it, it's a gradual thing. It's not like you start off by going and doing a big wall.
Sure.
You're doing all kinds of smaller stuff for years, and then eventually you've built up the skill and the gear to go do some of the bigger things.
Sure.
In fact, that's kind of what got me into skydiving. I had by about the mid 2000s, we started to see more of the Shane McConkey base jumping stuff that was coming out, especially when it came to ski base jump. And I thought it would always be neat to go back and do some base jumps on the climbs that I had done back in the 90s. And so that's kind of where I got this idea of like, man, I really want to maybe go back and do that. So
sure,
that steered me in the direction of skydiving, but it wasn't something that was really on my radar for very long at that point in time.
Well, it's kind of funny that you say that. When big wall climbing actually entered my consciousness as far as being something that I thought was super amazing, it was because a group of guys came out from the valley and said they all wanted to learn how to skydive so that they could start flicking the stuff they were climbing in the valley. And none of us instructors knew who the fuck these guys were, but it turned out they were the Stone Monkeys. This was Ivo Ninov and Nick Martinez and Ammon McNeely. We taught those guys how to skydive so that they could go on to become the badass base jumpers that they are. And then you find out
Potter was probably in that mix.
Yeah, Dean Potter was a skydiver on his own by then, but that's the reason I knew who Dean Potter was when I did a little flying in Lodi, because I'm like, oh, dude, you're freebase. You're that guy. Holy shit, you know? And it was because of the climbing stuff. And I've always done the gym climbing and a little bit of outdoor sport, but the big wall stuff always scared me. So having these guys, nervous on a skydive always used to crack me up, because I'm like, you guys can handle like 3 days of sheer terror, but a 30-second free fall is making you nervous.
Yeah, I wouldn't consider it sheer terror. I mean, when you're in the midst of it, you learn to train your mind. You learn your body is already trained to do what you need it to do. Now you got to train your mind to do it as well. And so, I think in a lot of ways, it's like non-skydivers looking at skydivers, and they say, I don't know how you could ever do that. Well, after 12,000 skydives, we've built our mind up to that. It's just something that we do every day. And big walls were kind of the same way for me. It's funny you mentioned the Stone Monkeys, because I was actually kind of getting into that scene back when they were the Stone Masters.
Okay. So
they were the Stone Masters, and then the Stone Monkeys came along. And so I was kind of in that transitional period of time then. And it's funny when you look at the advancement of big wall climbing, by coming out of the 80s into the early 90s, the thought of doing a climb on El Cap meant that you better be prepared for 2 days. Well, by the time Dean Potter rolled around, they were flashing that shit in 2 hours.
Yep.
And so I was in that time frame where we were doing routes that are now being done in a couple hours. We were doing them in about 12 hours.
Wow.
Get up and be there before the sun came up, and you were off and back to picking up some pizza by the end of the day.
That's just epic, man. It really is. Yeah. The climbing itself, physically, you learn how to handle it. For me, it was always the thought of that exposure. Again, what drew me to that was the scene so much, because you could see this brotherhood of climbers that reminded me so much of a drop zone, a proper drop zone where people have been there for a while. It's that sense of community, right?
Yeah, for sure. Especially when you're a new person in that new area, man. They just basically they take you in under their wing, and next thing you know, you've been there a day and you've got 4 new climbing partners that you just met.
Sure.
And you end up going and doing some pretty epic shit.
Well, to this day, I've still got Nick Martinez saying he's going to take me up El Cap, and I'm like, yeah, sure, man. Hoping he never does.
Oh man, you would have a blast. You would have an absolute blast.
I don't know about that, man.
And the ability to be in a place like Yosemite and be in a spot that tourists can't be at, you get a completely different perspective of the park than you would just driving through it, for sure.
That I couldn't disagree with at all. That's absolutely true. That's just like skydiving, right? It's the difference between looking out the window of the plane and getting out of the plane.
Yeah, for sure.
So speaking of, how did skydiving get back on your radar when you're doing all this other stuff?
So it was one of those things where, I like to be outside and do all kinds of outside type activities. And, by the end of the 90s, I'd done my first couple jumps in 90, I think it was 98, but it didn't intrigue me and didn't suck me in, because I just don't think it was. So you think of skiing as being real mainstream, right? And then you think of climbing being a little bit more niche. Like as you move from skiing to climbing, the community is a lot more tighter and it's a lot smaller. In the late 90s, move over to skydiving, it was a niche within a niche. And so it wasn't mainstream enough for me to really see how awesome skydiving was. And to be fair, in the late 90s, wingsuiting wasn't as big as it is today. Canopy progression isn't like it is today. And so really back then it was like you were learning to skydive to go base jump, or you were skydiving just to jump out of the plane and have fun. But nobody ever considered themselves a skydiver. They considered themselves a climber, or they considered themselves a skier that happened to go do those things. But it didn't suck me in like skiing and climbing did, partially because you could, like I said, you could walk into a bookstore and find 2 or 3 climbing magazines, or 2 and 3, 4 mainstream skiing magazines. There was nothing on skydiving.
Sure.
And at that point in time, technology wise, you were lucky to find a VHS copy of someone's first skydive.
Right.
YouTube didn't exist. The technology was such that it wasn't something. Where you would really see it would be, and a lot of skydivers will say that this was their inspiration, is in Hollywood. You'd see Point Break back in 92, or was it 92, 93? And the skydiving scene is the first exposure anybody had to that type of activity. And I know a lot of jumpers that was the catalyst that caused them to want to go jump. Mine was initially wanting to base jump, obviously, and then it just didn't really suck me in like it did later on. I actually probably took about a decade off, from about 2000 to 2011. I didn't jump at all. And then life gets in the way. I was trained as a paramedic, so I was working in pre-hospital emergency medicine for many years, and then working in occupational health and safety. And so once that kind of takes over, next thing you know, I'm not skiing as much as I used to, and I'm not climbing as much as I used to. Plus, I live in Alaska. The jump season in Alaska is not great,
right?
And during the jump season, the weather may not be good the entire time. So the options of for skydiving up north were not what you would want them to be in order to stay current enough to actually make it worth your while.
Sure. So,
and then of course, once 2000, I want to say 2002, 2003 started rolling around, that's when you started to see more mainstream stuff, videos coming out from, like I said, from Shane McConkey, JT Holmes, all those guys were doing all the ski base jump, and it's like, man, that would be really awesome to do.
Right.
But you started to see more of those videos as time progressed and as technology progressed. And then by 2005, when YouTube came out, you didn't have to wait until someone brought one over to a party and threw it in the VHS machine. You could just go online and take a look at it.
Sure.
And as it started to become more mainstream, I started to realize that skydiving had a lot more to offer than just falling out of a plane or getting prepped for base jumping.
Sure.
All of a sudden, this weird thing called free flying came out, and all of a sudden, the wingsuit technology started getting to the point where they were shooting some pretty rad video. And then, canopy started to get smaller. And what's this swoop thing that I heard of? The next thing you know, you're sitting there watching videos. And so for me, I found myself in a position where I showed up. I got transferred to Houston, Texas, of all places, from Alaska. And I was single. I didn't know anybody. I couldn't ski. There was really nowhere to climb. And so the next thing you know, I'm realizing there's a big drop zone just south of Houston, Skydive Spaceland. And so next thing you know, I'm out at Skydive Spaceland, and I think I've been logging 1,000 to 1,200 jumps a year since 2011.
That's fucking epic.
And that was mostly because there was nothing else to do in Houston besides drink and eat barbecue. and I'm not a football fan, so that threw me out of all the conversations with everybody in Texas. So
for sure. Well, it's funny that you mentioned Point Break, because I was just talking to Jason Moletsky. I had him on the show, and he's like, yeah, I'm a Point Break kid. And he was, so am I.
Yeah.
And I think the only reason that skydiving sucked me in much quicker was I had Paris Valley very close to me, where all the rock stars that were, making Chronicles and all these badass videos were, and they were always running on a TV. So I was actually exposed to what was possible right away. So I was, there when Zipser and Omar El Hijalan and all these guys were starting to do, and you're like, oh my God,
what's that?
Instant fucking hero worship with these guys, and so I had that input that you didn't have, or I could have seen it going the same way.
For sure. Absolutely. For sure. And then by the time we get to that point, like I said, when YouTube came out, all you really had to do is just type in skydiving and you'd find something cool that you didn't know existed ever before. And now you're like, man, I really want to go do that.
Sure.
And so it was an eye-opening experience. And then of course, by the time I got to Spaceland and started jumping there, hell, it was a big deal that you could land and plug in your video camera and watch it on the TV 5 minutes after you landed.
Yeah.
That was something that wasn't that big. Of course, those were the side-mounted Sony cameras that were still kind of dumb, but GoPros were becoming more prevalent. And next thing you know, anybody can record themselves jumping out of an airplane and doing rad shit. So that's when it really started to suck me in. Plus, I had nothing better to do with my life.
Fair enough. Well, but so you're doing the paramedic thing, which in itself is its own fucking extreme sport. I mean, holy shit, that you've got to have some pretty wild experiences from stuff like that.
Especially being in Alaska, man. I mean, so by the time I was getting out, I was doing a lot of remote medical stuff, basically working about 300 miles north of the Arctic Circle up on a place called the North Slope. Those are where you get the really extreme cold temperatures, the 70-degree below zero wind chill type situations. And as a paramedic, most paramedics are trained for city type operations. So you're going to be with a patient for maybe 12 to 15 minutes while you're transporting them and stabilizing them. Working out in the middle of nowhere, Alaska, you might be with a patient for 2 days while you're weathered in. And so the experience of that, it was like an extreme sport in some cases for sure.
Now the slope, that's the drilling, yeah?
Yeah, so the North Slope is one of the main drilling operations areas for a couple of the major producers. BP was up there at the time when I was there. I want to say Arco was there for a while, ConocoPhillips type scenarios. It's just slightly farther south than Barrow, which is the farthest north in the continental United States you can get, which is right there. You're right there on the Arctic Ocean. So
what a fucking wild place to be.
Yeah, it is pretty wild, especially when you consider, Alaska's so big. I mean, 2.5 times the size of Texas, right?
Yep.
I know Texans like to say everything's bigger in Texas. I used to like to tell everybody in Texas when I met them, oh, you're from Alaska. I was like, yeah, do you know what you get when you divide Alaska into two? You get Texas being the third largest state. I always hated that. But with the size comes a diversity that you don't see in many states. So we were talking earlier before we started recording about you being down in Juneau.
Yeah.
Juneau is very almost like a rainforesty type situation. Obviously they get snow in the wintertime. You move up to central Alaska, it starts to get more mountainous. By the time you get to central Alaska, you hit the Alaska Range, and it's the tallest peaks in the country.
Yeah.
And then once you get above the Brooks Range, they call it the slope because the Brooks Range mountains come down to a spot, and then from that spot all the way to the Arctic Ocean, it's just flat and it's a gentle slope all the way to the water. And so you'll land in the North Slope of Alaska, and on a clear day, you can see in any direction as far as the eye can see, and it's just completely flat. There's no forest, there's no trees, there's no mountains. It's just flat. And then, then you see polar bears and you see caribou and you see all these different creatures. And it was an experience for sure.
It had to be. I mean, especially going up there when your line of work is to deal with people who've seen the worst of it. I mean,
yeah,
that's in itself. I mean, that takes a special mentality to be able to cope with people in that type of situation regardless, but to be in the situation that most likely is what got them there as well. So you're not just taking care of somebody else, you're making sure you don't end up in the same boat as them.
Oh, absolutely. That was actually kind of my transition. So I transitioned out of pre-hospital emergency medicine into occupational health and safety. And I think at the time, the people that were hiring me to do that type of work kind of thought that those things coincided, and they really don't when you think about it. Pre-hospital emergency medicine is about cleaning up after the fact, right? And occupational health and safety is about preventing those things from happening in the first place.
Sure.
So it was a natural transition for me to come out of that pre-hospital emergency medical mentality into occupational health and safety. because I was able to, present to the people that I worked with, like, these are the things that can happen. Let me show you. Like, let me tell you what can happen if we don't take care of this up front. And so it was a very natural transition for me to make that move.
Well, and occupational health and safety must have been made the transition into becoming a skydiver very easy for you in being able to identify potential hazards and start to think safety orientation instead, especially when you're starting out with a sport that can be deadly.
Yeah, for sure. Risk assessment is something that we do on a daily basis. Just getting out of bed and driving our car and doing all the things that we do, we have a certain amount of risk that we're willing to take. Some people are willing to drive down the road with their knees on their steering wheel, eating a hamburger with the radio cranked up and their phone in their hand, and other people aren't. But when you start looking at that type of stuff in regards to skydiving, certainly risk assessment, risk mitigation is one of those things that makes it a lot easier, at least for me, to see how safe skydiving actually is, at least modern day skydiving actually is.
Sure. Now, how did your transition go into, I know you said you started jumping in Houston basically to kill time because there wasn't much else to do, but obviously at some point it started getting to be proper serious if you're cranking out 1,000 to 1,200 jumps.
Yeah, for sure. After a while you start, that was really the mainstream part of it for me when skydiving started to become more mainstream and you could see what was going on. Talking about climbing back in the 90s, you could go find, Stone Masters 5 or anything that Don Osmond was doing in the day. You could get a video of it and watch it. Well, by the time, we're talking, this is about 2012, 2013, 2014, we were starting to see some of the super rad videos coming out of places like Dubai, right? And now you're starting to be able to see what can be done. And next thing you know, you're like talking to your buddies, you're like, let's go try that. We could probably give that a shot.
Right.
That might be when the risk assessment phase in my skydiving career was not where it is today, but you don't know what you don't know in some cases.
Right.
But you go out with friends and you try something and the next thing you know, it works. And you're like, holy shit, that worked. Let's go try this. And then you're doing something else. And the next thing you know, hey, I see they're doing a rad camp in Arizona. Arizona Arsenal's throwing on a rad camp. I'm going to go out there and check that out. So next thing you know, I'm leaving Houston and I'm going to Arizona and I'm going to California, Paris Valley, popping down to Sebastian during invasion, right?
Yeah.
And so next thing you know, you're meeting friends, you're making friends, you're doing new stuff, and you're looking, what can I do to help, push myself? And in some cases, it was pretty awesome to be around and be in positions where we actually were pushing the sport in different directions that hadn't gone yet. And to be a part of it on the ground level was pretty interesting time for sure.
Oh, it had to be. Especially as you start out in the sport when you're seeing it kind of just hit the ground running, and to be able to see this amazing transition over the decade that you kind of took off, come back to it and seeing where it's gone in that time off, and then all of a sudden find yourself pushing it in even new directions. How cool is that?
It was absolutely amazing, and I never expected to be in those positions. But, when you jump as much as you do, it turns into a situation where that's just a natural direction that it ends up taking.
Sure. Now,
you see quite a few people getting in and they do a few jumps and it's fun and it's all fine and good. And then after about a year, they trickle out and they go back to whatever it is they want to do, or they move on to something else. We're seeing a lot of people nowadays getting into skydiving just a base jump, or getting into skydiving and after a year or two, they're trickling over to paragliding,
sure,
or other activities like that. But yeah.
Well, and that's all good. I'm firmly of the opinion, once a skydiver, always a skydiver, just because of the community. I know people that haven't jumped in 20 years that are still very active members of the skydiving community, because you form such amazing bonds with people so quickly. It's that foxhole friendship mentality, right? You put yourself through extreme situations with people, even just a few times, and you figure out who that person is on a fundamental level that you don't usually get to do with people.
Oh, absolutely. For sure. When you're dealing in situations that can be considered extreme, you build, it's almost like a brothership that's, they say brotherships forged in battle, or brotherships forged in commonality, or things like that. Yeah, I can absolutely see that.
Absolutely. Well, and then you start taking those core groups and pushing it in all these different directions. I know you've got big stuff coming up that is all kind of forwarding things and pushing into new directions and doing all these amazing trips and stuff. I mean, how did all that come about?
So there came a point in time, I think it was right around 2016, where I was getting out of working in the oil industry, and I was considering leaving Texas. And I was approached by the owner of the Drop Zone, Steve Boyd Sr., and he asked if I would be willing to come work as the manager at Skydive Spaceland Houston. And I hadn't really considered working in skydiving at that point. You know, I'd been a tandem instructor for a while, but you know, a tandem instructor in the sense that I can now go to a bar and pick up a girl and be like, yeah, I'll take you skydiving, right?
Yep.
I was current enough to be safe, current enough to get laid, right? But I wouldn't consider myself a professional skydiver at that point in time. Been on a few world records and things like that, but it wasn't my job. It was just a hobby that I did on the side, and I happened to have some good times doing it. So to making the transition into a full-time working skydiver, well, that opportunity came, and I decided to take it. After about a year, he asked me to move to skydive at Spaceland Dallas because he started acquiring more Spaceland drop zones. I think they're at 5 now. And I spent about 5 years in Dallas running the operations up there as the drop zone manager. And while I was there, I met a very interesting guy named Ryan Parrott. Everyone calls him Birdman. He's a former Navy SEAL, former sniper, and he runs a charity called the Bird's Eye View Project. And through the Bird's Eye View Project and through another company of his called American Extreme, they raise money for veterans type services and things like that. And I met him at Skydive Spaceland Dallas. He was doing something called the Bomb Squad, where if he had people that raised a certain amount of money for the foundation or for the charity, he would bring them out to the drop zone, and we would take them on discounted tandems and things like that. And so he would come out on a Tuesday and bring 100 people. And so I started hanging out more with him, you know, because he was putting these things on. And as time progressed, you know, he's done a couple other charity events. We did an excellent charity event where we got to take a veteran from each war, starting from World War II to present times on a tandem. We videoed it, put it all together, turned it into a little bit of a documentary. And so that's kind of how I got involved with what we're going to be doing here next month. But it's all been to raise funds for different veterans charities and veterans organizations through that Bird's Eye View Project and through Ryan Parrott.
I mean, that's absolutely epic. And it's something that I've seen quite a lot in my years of skydiving. Skydivers tend to use this amazing platform we have to help out a lot of different groups. And I've always seen incredible stuff done for veterans groups. And it's nice to see it continue on, especially at that level. I mean, bringing out 100 people because they raise so much money for veterans groups, that's epic.
Yeah, and you know, it's funny to me because when you look at skydiving, I think skydiving is very veteran-centric in the sense that you meet a lot of veterans that skydive. A lot of them learned how to skydive in the military, and now they just happen to be, you know, in the civilian life, but they still skydive. When I was a manager at Skydive Spaceland Dallas, I probably had, I want to say half my staff was probably veterans or currently serving military members.
Wow.
So skydiving, military stuff kind of go hand in hand, I think. And so it makes sense that that's something that we can use to help progress some of these projects.
Sure. Well, I mean, I not to disparage some skydivers, but the military has such an amazing work ethic that they make fantastic staff. And then there's the rest of us.
Yeah, that's true.
You know,
that's very true. I will say that the military staff I had, or ex-military staff I had, were definitely more squared away than most.
Squared away. That's something I haven't heard in a long time. Yeah, absolutely squared away. I mean, it's, again, not to talk shit about the skydivers that weren't military. I know a lot of really, really hardworking skydivers that have never been anywhere near the military because it interfered with their, you know, their weed consumption. but still amazing jumpers in their own right. But I've always said, especially as a tandem or an AFF instructor, you'd get a military guy that would come out to do a first jump, and there was no question, man, that guy just fucking did what you said, and it was amazing.
Exactly what you tell them to do.
Oh yeah, man. Once they've got the script, man, they're good to go. Now, how was it transitioning into managing a drop zone? I mean, I've seen it done. I think I kind of know what goes into it, but it never looked like that much fun to me.
Man, pun intended, it has its ups and downs being a manager of a drop zone. I would say that, yeah, when you start out, it probably has way more ups than downs. And to be honest, by the time I was ready to leave, Dallas. I think I was kind of in one of those downward slumps. Super love Spaceland. Spaceland's an awesome place to be. But there did come a point in time when your hobby becomes your work. You finally have a day off and it's a beautiful day, perfect for jumping, and you don't want to skydive.
Yep.
That's when you kind of know that, maybe I need to take a step back from being in this position where, it's a 364 day a year drop zone, and I'm not able to go do some of the other stuff that I want to do. And it was very good to be there and gain that knowledge and gain that experience. And then now I'll take that experience and go do other things.
Sure. Well, I mean, I definitely feel you on the getting to that point where you've got that perfect day and no desire to go. And I've hit that both as a jumper and as a pilot, where I've got that day off and the last thing in the world I want to do is hear a turbine spinning and go out to the drop zone. I just don't have it in me. I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing. I think it makes you take a step back and reevaluate. So when you do go back, you've gone back with a purpose. Whether it's just to go have fun or for whatever reason, you've gone back with a purpose instead of just, oh fuck, it's a day off, I better go jump.
It's funny. It's funny because I've been helping out up at Skydive Oregon, which is I live in the Pacific Northwest now, and so I live in a place that's about 4 or 5 hours from drop zones. So I'm far enough away from it, but I am able to go up, say Friday morning, drive up to towards Portland, spend 3 or 4 days doing tandems and not being a manager. Sure. It's a completely different night and game type situation. Like, I leave there at the end of the weekend, totally stoked. Like my fuel's been filled up and I'm ready to go out and do other things. I don't have to worry about anything else going around. I don't have to go talk to that guy about his bad landing. I'm there. I do my thing. I have fun with people, and I bounce out. And it's fun being a fun jumper again, I guess is the best way to say it.
I completely agree, man. I hadn't jumped for a few years and was out. I had taken the gig in Dubai and was flying there, and I don't think I jumped in about 3 years. And to the point where no one actually knew me there as a jumper. I would have people, so have you ever jumped? And I'm like, yeah. I've jumped once or twice. And then my buddy David Jr. Ludwig, during a boogie, we had the day off, and he's like, dude, you want to go make a jump? And I fucking got butterflies. I'm like, oh, you mean skydive? Yeah. Holy shit, I can do that. And at the time, Skydive Dubai staff didn't pay for jumps. So I had unlimited skydives on days off.
No reason not to.
Yeah, I never took advantage of it. And I went out and did that jump and landed and went, oh, that's why I started all this. And just got to go be a fun jumper with an expired tandem rating. So I'm not chucking drugs. I'm just going and doing my thing. And it was a whole new chapter in skydiving, which was amazing.
Yeah, for me, it was, I hadn't been able to do some of the skydiving that I wanted to do. I've been doing a lot of XRW leading up to me leaving to Dallas. But even as a manager, you don't really have the time on a Saturday when you've got the wingsuit talent out there to go do what you want to do. But I'm up at Skydive Oregon. I think it was my second weekend helping them out. And I went and did an XRW jump. And as I'm coming into land, you're physically giggling to yourself. And then you land and you're like picking up your gear and you're like just giggling like a child as you walk across the runway. Oh man, that was so fun. That was, for me, was like this is what it feels to be like a fun jumper again.
Yeah, it's nice, man. It really is. And it just kind of, it reminds you, it's that tap on the shoulder that goes, hey, all the other bullshit, that doesn't matter. This is why you got into it in the first place. And then, of course, luckily for me, having started the podcast, 3.5 years ago now, every time I get to sit down and have a conversation with another jumper who's either still got that stoke or they're finding it again, or I did an interview with a guy a while back that had just started jumping. I think he wasn't even with his A license, had quit his job, bought an RV and was like, I'm fucking doing it. And now I'm keeping up with him on social media, and he's got God knows how many jumps. He's hit his 10th drop zone, is just loving life. So I kind of get that stoke back just having the conversations, which is amazing.
Yeah. It's hard sometimes to remember that we all started somewhere.
Yeah.
And I mean, coming in from your first couple jumps, you're giggling. I was giggling the same way I was giggling on jump number 12,000.
Not amazing.
In from an XRW jump.
There's not too many sports you can get that from.
Yeah, for sure.
There really aren't.
Yeah.
Now, tell me about this big project you got coming up next month.
So we're doing what's called a human performance project. This has been in the works for probably since 2000, maybe 18 is when I first had the conversation, 19, about this project. And so it's been a long time coming, but we really started in earnest this last year, doing the training and getting the stuff need to go do this trip. The plan for this trip is we're going to be hitting all seven continents. We're going to be doing a skydive or a base jump. We're going to be doing a marathon on each continent. We're going to be doing a swim, which isn't really a swim, but we're jumping in the water. It's more symbolic than anything else. And we're trying to do it all in 7 days. And I know there was a group that just went and did something very similar to ours this last week. They were just doing the jumps. And so it's been fun watching their progress. But we're going to be doing that sometime around mid-February. I think on the 15th is when we're scheduled to leave. So it's been a challenging experience as we've been planning for it. But I think the rewards will pay off in the end, and it's going to be a challenging trip, but certainly going to be one for the books.
I mean, a jump, a marathon, and a dip everywhere you go. Damn, that's ambitious.
Now, granted, I'm not running a marathon on every continent, just so everybody knows. I'm gonna get my runs in. We have a lady that's coming on this trip that's active military EOD. She's going to be running a mile on each continent wearing the full bomb suit. And then there's some other smaller stuff that's going to be going on, but all of this is in an effort to raise funds and awareness for the projects with Ryan Parrott and the Bird's Eye View project.
That's, I mean, super spectacular and really creative as well. I mean, that's the kind of stuff, especially nowadays in this unique personal media driven landscape that we have, to be able to come up with stuff like that and put that energy towards a good cause and not just followers on Instagram is spectacular.
For sure. And this event is it's very specific on what we are trying to raise awareness for. I mean, some events are like, oh, we're just raising veteran awareness, but we're actually focusing this event on suicide. Specifically veteran suicide, first responders, everyone that's coming on this trip that's going to be doing the activities are either ex-military, current military, or ex or current first responders, paramedics, firefighters, police. And so we've been focusing on that. I think it was right about the time we started talking about it, Ryan Parrott's sniper partner had just committed suicide. And so he was looking at the projects that he's been doing as a whole and saying, hey, what can we do to not just to raise awareness, but what can we do to actually help people?
Sure.
And so that was the genesis of the project as a whole.
Well, I mean, that whole list that you named is all the top of the list for victims of suicide, are they not?
Correct. That is correct. Statistically, when you're looking at the statistics, I want to say that suicide on a whole is on the rise.
Oh, yeah.
Sure. But when you look at those specific categories, not doing a univariate analysis on it, but doing a multivariate analysis, you start to break it down by age groups and by gender and by job types, and things like that. I think the average is still 22 veterans a day kill themselves. And I know that number amongst first responders, police, firefighters, paramedics is on the rise as well. Not quite as bad as that. So
sure.
Part of the background stuff that everybody doesn't see about this project is the people that are going on this, that are going to be doing all of the skydives, the marathons, and the swims. They are actually, this is being treated as an experiment. So most of them are ex-special forces, high speed, high impact on their bodies over time. A lot of them are ex-military now. And so, you're looking at suicide as a whole and you're saying, what does the VA do for veterans when it comes to suicide stuff? You go into the VA, they say, yep, you looks like you got some PTSD, here, take some drugs. And, it's not a long-term solution by any means. And that's probably why it's the numbers are so high, even still with veterans. But, all of these athletes have come together. They have spent time in the medical community over the last year. They've been getting brain scans and they've been getting all these different things so that by the end of this training cycle and by the end of this event, they're going to come back together. They're going to get reevaluated, and hopefully they can start putting together things to say, what can we do specifically health-wise for people to assist with this problem that we have of suicide, not just handing them some drugs and saying, good luck, right?
Sure.
Because we're seeing a tie between the emotional and mental aspect of depression and suicide, and the fact that you used to be high speed and now you're taking medication and you're not as active as you used to be, and now you're not physically where you need to be, And all of that is a perfect storm that comes together that takes people to the lowest point of their life. And next thing you know, they're making a decision that nobody wants them to make.
Sure. You know, it's funny. I just literally last night I recorded an episode with Jason Moletsky, which will actually air before this one, where he talked about being drawn to skydiving because he was at a really dark point in his life. And he said he went out to make his first jump, not giving a fuck if the parachute opened. And he made that first jump. And it was, as he put it, a 90-degree left turn. He went, oh, shit. Okay. I'm just going to go big. I'm going to fucking send it because, wow, that was something else. And it changed the course of his life.
For sure. Absolutely. I think I used to tell people that skydiving finds everybody at that point in their life when they need it the most.
Oh, yeah.
The cautionary tale I had besides that is, I don't know if you've noticed this at all, but the last year especially, I don't want to say since the start of the pandemic, because I don't have specific numbers, but this last year, I personally have seen a rise in suicides amongst friends that are skydivers and base jumpers as well. Yep. I want to say, so I was at the bridge in November, and a relatively well-known base jumper, I don't want to really name names because I don't know if families are really interested in me talking about it out loud, but had committed suicide. And most of us that were there at the bridge together knew that particular person. And while we were having that conversation with a couple that was thinking about investing in this trip, they had just mentioned, hey, our son's friend just killed themselves 2 weeks ago, a seventh grader, right? And then I started looking back, this last year, I want to say I've lost 13 friends to suicide. Christ. I want to say 9 in December, I counted 9 friends in 7 months, and not all of them were veterans or first responders. I mean, there were quite a few of them were skydivers and base jumpers. The cautionary tale I have with that is, you get into skydiving, in his case, he gets into it saying, I don't give a fuck, right? And now skydiving becomes the drug. Yeah. And over that a longer period of time, just like any other drug, it starts to not work like it used to. Sure. It's no longer adrenaline that you're getting from it. You're getting dopamine, and that's still fine. But, 5, 6, 7 years into it, you started off with not giving a fuck. And now 5 years later, it's not doing what it used to do, and now you're starting to not give a fuck again. And that's then next thing you know, they're going, oh, I found base jumping. That'll get me to where I need to be. And so they start using that as the drug, and then they maybe find something else. But there does eventually come a point in time when you have to ask yourself the question, am I treating the symptoms here, or am I actually treating the disease? Sure. And I think in a lot of cases we're too used to treating the symptoms and not used to trying to treat the disease, or actually being able to figure out how to treat the disease.
Sure. Well, that seems to be, unfortunately, the culture. And you're right. I have seen similar stuff, although not nearly those numbers. And it's funny because I used to think, as odd as it sounds, or maybe it doesn't sound odd, I used to think that skydivers were suicide proof. Like we'd figured it out, right? We had the magic solution because we figured out how to live life in the moment, and we didn't get affected by that stuff. And just a couple of years ago, I had a guy that was a brother, a super close friend named Kevin Love, commit suicide. I remember being shocked by it because I just didn't think that was possible. And knock wood, I'm lucky in that my mind has never gone that direction. Doesn't mean it couldn't, but it never has. And it was a real wake up call to go, oh shit. I mean, this happens to us too.
Yeah, for sure. It's what did I say? The statistics last year were 60,000 people committed suicide in the US last year.
Jesus
and
Christ. So,
I mean, yeah, it's never going to go away, and I understand that, but there's got to be something better that we can do. Sure. And part of this process is for us is trying to figure out what it is that we can provide when this is all over, data wise, that hopefully we'll be able to help people in the future.
Well, and it's an amazing project on its own, but because of what's driving it makes it that much more so. And in fact, just listening to the story after the podcast, I'm absolutely going to hit you up for information on the Birdman and how I can sit down and have a talk with him, because I'd love to pick his brain on the podcast and hear more about his journey.
Oh yeah, he is such an interesting cat, man. I'm going to turn this off real quick because I'm getting a phone call, but I'm going to put that aside. Yeah, he loves to talk about his projects. He loves to talk about charities, and he's a lot more eloquent than I am. So if you ever get an opportunity to have him on, he's I joke around that I've got a face for radio and a voice for silence. He's got a face and a voice for radio and TV. So you'll be able to have a much better conversation with him about it.
No, man, this has been
the brainchild.
This has been absolutely fantastic. I think you sell yourself short because you've got an interesting story and a very relaxed way of putting it, which is nice.
That's the alcohol. I got like 5 drinks in me already.
Oh shit! All right. Well,
I'm just kidding.
Well, 5 drinks from last night, right? So
I gotta say, shameless plug for you, by the way. So I was thinking about, you sent me a note last week about coming on the show, and I was getting really excited about coming on. I was like, if you had asked me 8 years ago, so for a lot of the younger air sport people out there, younger skydivers, younger base jumpers, younger paraglider pilots, all those people, they probably don't even remember Blue Skies magazine. But it was one of my favorite, like my monthly thing that I liked the most was coming home and seeing the Blue Skies magazine. And then obviously the cherry on top of Blue Skies magazine was flipping to the very back at the very end after reading all the rad articles and reading the fucking pilot article. And so if you had asked me years ago that if I'd ever be on a podcast with the fucking pilot, I would have laughed in your fucking face. So this has been a real treat for me.
Oh, that's awesome, man. It's
shameless plug.
It's funny because all these years later, after all those articles, I still can't believe they let me write half of the stuff that I did. And I've got all the old magazines, and I'll flip through every once in a while. And I compiled the book a while back, and as I'm, proofreading it and doing all that stuff, I'm going, oh, Jesus, I put this in print. Oh my God. No wonder my articles were always in the back of the magazine.
Yeah. I just figured that they were anchoring it at the very end. Like it was a treat. You get all the way to the end, but no, and mentioning your book, I actually have that book on Kindle. I got it when it came out. And so I occasionally go through and flip through it. You wrote another one too that I like too. What was it? The Accidental Stripper?
The Accidental Stripper. Yeah. Yeah. That was kind of a mix of both the books, because that's how I, no pun intended, fell into stripping. And then and that transitioned into skydiving. And so, yeah, I kind of they kind of crossed paths in the middle of those. But yeah, that was a fun one to write, because it's just as ridiculous as some of the shit that happens in skydiving.
Oh yeah, some of the stories you hear around the bonfire, like those would be a classic story, I would imagine.
Well, talking to Jason yesterday, like I told him, you find yourself, and I'm sure you get this as well when you're talking to non-skydivers, telling stories about the stuff that you've done in the sport, not necessarily just jumping, but just in the community, not believing the words that are coming out of your mouth, because your stories are just, you're telling them going, this sounds so fucking ridiculous, but it happened. Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, I think there's a reason why skydivers tend to only have skydiving friends, is because most of their normal friends don't want to listen to them talk about those stories anymore.
Yep.
And so, yeah, I could see that happening for sure.
Yeah. I think that's the mix of the popularity with this podcast, is that most of the people listening are just like, yeah, nobody else wants to listen to these stories, but I do.
Well, this has definitely been a treat for me. The last Blue Skies magazine treat that I had was a hat trick that I pulled. I made it on the cover. A buddy of mine took a picture. Then the next month, I made the cover picture. I shot it. And then the month after that, I think one of our world records was the centerfold. So I had a hat trick there and got 3 Blue Sky magazines in a row. And that's kind of been the highlight of my career, to be honest.
I mean, it was such a great magazine. Laura and Cole.
I miss it.
Oh, me too.
I miss it.
Me too. I had so much fun writing for them, and so much fun reading all the different articles. And because you had such extremes, right? You had Melanie Curtis and then me, completely different ways of telling stories, and completely different stories, but it all wrapped up in the same magazine with a set of boobs in the front and fatality reports in the back.
And that's what I was going to say, is like, you never knew when you're going to flip the page and see a pair of boobs. And it's like, it's awesome.
Well, and I used to get so much shit for it, because for as many people as enjoyed my writing, there were that many that hated it because it could get a little over the top. And I had to remind people, this is a magazine being run by 2 women who asked me to write this shit.
Yeah. Plus, I mean, it's a skydiving community. What do you expect?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So as we wrap things up, I'm going to have you give me any social media stuff, any way of following you, and definitely how to follow this project that you got coming up, as well as the reason you're doing the project.
Yeah, for sure. So I I'm going to be posting a lot of stuff during this trip on Instagram. So my Instagram handle is at @jump_junkie. There's a couple of other jump junkies out there, but look for the one with the ugly mug of me on it, and that's probably going to be me. And then I would recommend, if anybody wants to find out really more about the project that we're doing, if you go to americanextreme.com, there's a box you can click that says Human Performance Project. There's a rundown of the people on the team and some of their background. And there's also a big part at the beginning that talks about, the project itself, where it came from and what we're trying to accomplish. And I recommend everybody go take a look at that and then follow along on the journey. It's going to be interesting. Just to give a brief rundown of what we'll be doing, we'll be leaving Dallas, Texas to go to Cape Town sometime around the 15th of February. And then once we depart Cape Town to Antarctica, the second we jump out of the plane, the countdown stops. We're going to be hitting White Desert, Antarctica, Perth, Australia, Dubai, Cairo, Egypt, London, and then Colombia. And then we're going to be back in Dallas sometime around the 23rd. So it'll be quite an experience. We have our own Airbus 340, so that's going to be pretty rad as well.
Dude, that's incredible.
For all you pilots out there that are jealous, that's what we're going to be flying to each continent on. So that'll be pretty cool.
That is incredible, man. I cannot wait to follow the progression of the trip. And I think between talking to you maybe for a round 2 afterwards and talking to the Birdman, I think it's an amazing thing. And I can't wait to see how it all turns out.
Well, hopefully it'll turn out the way we want it to. And if not, well, it is what it is.
It is what it is, man. Yeah, absolutely. Ben, thank you so much for taking the time, man. This has been fantastic.
Thank you for having me on, man.
All right, brother. You take care. And there you have it. Another episode of Lunatic Fringe Into the Void, brought to you as always by, and say it with me, fuck yeah, NZ Aerosports. Head to nzaerosports.com. By Pussfoot. That's right, head to pussfoot.com, the extreme sports collective, and check out everything they've got to offer. By summitparachutesystems.com. Jarrett Martin and the family cranking out amazing pilot rigs, as well as incredible rigging courses. And now joining the Lunatic team, it's the one and only Tony Suits. You know him, you love him. Head to tonysuit.com. Check out all the amazing standards, as well as the new incredible signature line they've got going on. And as for us, the Lunatic Fringe is now on YouTube. That's right, you're going to have the chance to put faces to the audio by heading to youtube.com and looking up the Lunatic Fringe podcast. It's easy. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, check out all the amazing videos from the previous guests that we've had, as well as new and upcoming interviews on video. As always, I am the fucking pilot. Head to thefuckingpilot.net or theprincesspilot.com. Thanks for joining. We'll see you next time around.
Thank you.